Hey, with us once again, Paul Craig Roberts to talk about a recent prediction he made about the Democrats getting Kamala to step aside so that Hillary could eventually become president. Now, the Washington Post itself, that liberal newspaper, is running a column calling for that very thing for Kamala to step aside, although they didn't mention Hillary yet, but they said she should be replaced by somebody with, quote, executive experience. So, Paul, is this all coming to fruition now? What you predicted a few months ago, and what we talked about a few months ago?
It certainly looks, Larry, like a version of it is. You see, an article like that could not be written or published unless it was going to be part of the agenda. You see, what the Washington Post columnist did, she not only discredited Biden, saying that people didn't think he would survive to fill out the term. She also, the columnist also expressed strong disappointment in Camilla's failure as vice president. What a terrible job she had done. So when you see a leading voice of the establishment saying that the vice presidential candidate is unsatisfactory, and that Biden is seen as unsatisfactory by the electorate because of all the problems he's had. And of course, with his Justice Department declaring him incompetent to stand trial, this has to be something that they're working into the agenda. There's no other explanation for it. Otherwise,
Let me
the
interrupt you.
editor who published it would be fired and the columnist would be fired. So in today's tightly controlled media, it's impossible for something like that to be written and published unless it's got the approval. And so that means whether this will be the agenda they take, they may not know yet, but they're certainly getting it ready. They're starting to put it in place.
Well, what surprised me, in addition, is that the Washington Post put it out. You wouldn't expect that from considering the editorial stances that they've taken for so long.
Well, they wouldn't have put it out unless they were told to. So the Washington Post is not independent. No media, none of the print or TV media or NPR. These are not independent organizations. These are tightly controlled organizations. And so the fact that they put it out means that the ruling elite are concerned about the situation. They're concerned, we've seen these polls. One of the polls said that 90% of the respondents thought Biden was too old to be president. Another poll showed that 71% of the people who actually voted for him think the same. So they have to be concerned. They certainly are not going to allow Trump to be president. That's a given. They will not allow Trump to be president. And so if the Biden-Camilla ticket looks so vulnerable that no one would believe if they stole the election again. In other words, it just wouldn't be believable that a totally untenable ticket, said to be untenable by the Washington Post itself, it can't win. So if they don't somehow get a ticket that can win, then they'll have to use some other means. They can always just have Trump assassinated. That's an easy thing for them to do. But they would probably rather not do that. And so there's a whole range of black swans they could use. There could be a financial situation that's easy to arrange, financial. All the Treasury Secretary has to do is say the wrong thing, or we saw just, it was yesterday, I think, the bond market sold off. They had some bad inflation report. And so the hopes of interest rates coming down were stymied, at least yesterday. It so much depends just on words that come from the Fed or the Treasury that they can create an economic black swan. They can get more involved in war. You would not have the president of France talking about sending NATO troops to Ukraine, sending French troops to Ukraine, unless we told him to do that. The French president is not independent of the State Department of Washington any more than the British Prime Minister or the German Chancellor. These are all controlled puppets. There hasn't been any independent foreign policy anywhere in Europe since Charles de Gaulle left the presidency of France. He was the last European leader that had an independent foreign policy. And of course, we hated him for it. So none of this can happen without the word coming down.
Well, let's just review for the viewers that might not have heard your original hypothesis. How would this occur? What would be the sequence of getting Hillary into the White House?
Well, the way I suggested it was that, they would put pressure on Biden to step down because of the polls, because of all his stumbling and confusions, and of course the Department of Justice ruling that he's not mentally competent to stand trial. How can he be president? So my view was they would put pressure on Biden and Camilla, and they would have this worked out in advance with Camilla, and she would rise to the presidency, and they would tell her, okay, you pick Hillary as the vice president, which is the way it would work. And then they would put pressure on Camilla to step aside. They would promise her she'd probably get to be attorney general. And that's probably more of her line. And she would certainly get something for not making an issue of it. And so then Hillary would be president prior to the election. And of course, she would be a more credible candidate. And if she needed it, the feds can heat up the border crisis in Texas, heat up the conflict between Washington and Texas about defending the border, say, oh my gosh, there's going to be a civil war, and declare a national emergency and suspend the election. So this would be a very easy thing for them to do. You know, we have all of these very strange court rulings about whether Texas can defend the border or not. And we saw yesterday they weren't able to defend the border because the immigrant invaders just broke through and pushed the troops aside. So I was wondering, what good does it do to have troops guarding the border when they're not allowed to fire on violent invaders? So this whole thing can be easily manipulated just like that. And of course, there's a whole line of black swans. We could speculate all morning on all the other ways they could create some sort of crisis that lets them declare martial law.
Do you see any other candidate beyond Hillary to replace Biden?
No, who would it be?
Well, you know, they keep talking about Newsom, but, you know, with his record in California, I don't know how they could sell him. Michelle Obama claims that she doesn't want to be president. So I don't know who else would be on their bench.
I don't think they have anyone, and I think there's some uncertainty about among the elite whether Hillary's too burnt. If she's too burnt from her emails, from all the scandals, and that may be why it's going so late before they move in that direction, you know, because she is burnt, you know. They've covered up for her so much that a lot of people know that. Still, she's all they got. I mean, what are they going to do? Take Chuck Schumer?
Well, what you're also saying is if they do fix the election, it's easier to fix it with Hillary because, she has less vulnerability about not being elected than something like Biden. So they could still squeeze her in despite the baggage that she has.
Yeah. Plus, she's fully protected by the FBI and the CIA.
Yeah.
And of course, all the media love her.
What happens if they get another 4 years? Are we crossing the Rubicon?
If the Democrats get in this time, the United States is finished. Look what's going on with the prosecutions of Trump and the so-called January 6th insurrectionists. That's people who attended a rally. These are the most abusive violation of law since the Stalinist show trials. These violations of law are so extreme, I can't believe they're being tolerated.
Yeah.
But they're not only being tolerated, they're being supported. And we've had the recent case where this Black woman Soros had put in as the Attorney General in New York. She has brought a case against Trump for which there are no complainants. It's a civil case, and she's the only complainant. And of course, she wasn't harmed in any way by Trump's loans or whatever value he stated they were. No evidence before the court supported her charges or the judge's rulings. All the lenders to Trump said, look, we don't care what he values them. We don't even look at it. We just want to do business with him. It doesn't matter. We have no complaint. Most of the witnesses said that it's worth at least what he said it was worth. So now she's declared he has got to come up with $500 million in cash, or she's going to seize his New York properties. Well, this is confiscation. And she doesn't give him any time even to make an appeal. The way she structured it, if he doesn't come up with that money almost immediately, she can seize the properties before the appeal court makes a ruling. So we see here the use of law for criminal confiscation. The same thing we see has happened to all of the 1,000 so far Trump supporters who went to the rally. They all have experienced this. Here comes the Justice Department. They bust into their home in the middle of the night, handcuff them in front of their kids, drag them off, accuse them of several misdemeanors. And if they don't agree to a plea bargain, that is to admit a guilt to something, then they throw in a felony charge, which takes you to prison for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
So they force you to self-incriminate in order to avoid a felony charge. Well, this is one of the most crude, most abusive violations of law that has ever occurred in human history. And it's accepted. And even the Republicans in Congress do nothing about it. Some time ago, they did release the films of the so-called violent intruders into the Congress. And what the films show is the police opened the doors, escorted them in, escorted them through. There was no violent invasion of the Capitol, yet that's all we hear still from the horror media, from the Democrats. It's, oh, these violent insurrections. So there was no insurrection. There was no violent invasion. The films show that,
Yeah,
but it
Paul,
doesn't matter because they've got this going on in DC where the jury pool is 95% black Democrat. They got a chance to get even, and they are.
yeah,
And that's all it is. It's not a trial. It's not justice. It's actually worse than Stalinist show trials. Stalin actually paid more attention to the law than the Justice Department has paid in these prosecutions of people who attended a rally. And the media has done a better job in demonizing them than the Soviet media did to people on show trial during the Stalinist era. So how can a country survive this? But of course, the fact that the Democrats have done this, they can't possibly let Trump in because they know this time there will be retribution. And so if all else fails, they'll have a lone nut gunman shooting.
Paul, you and others have said that even if by any chance, slim chance, that Trump does regain the presidency, his hands will be tied again. He won't be able to do very much to turn things around, correct?
I've said this supposition could be one reason, the only reason I can think of, that the elite would let him in. The elite may come to the conclusion that he can't do anything if he gets in any more than he could the first time, and that there's no one he can appoint that will support him or help him clean out. Who would it be? Who would they be? Who in Washington? There's not anybody. Who anywhere? How would Trump know them? How can somebody from outside the system survive it? So it could be that they would simply say, well, he can't do anything anyhow. If he comes up with people that would actually help him, say he gets an FBI director, he gets an attorney general who would actually help him clean out things, we can simply prevent the Senate from confirming them in office.
Yeah.
The Senate will just be told, don't confirm them.
And maybe this time, maybe the second time around, he will be both impeached and convicted and tossed out of office as president.
Yeah, that's true. Or in my view, the reason they would let him in is not only because he won't be able to do anything, but because they know it will completely and totally demoralize his supporters, which seems to be a majority of the voting population. And they'll be so demoralized, they just give up. And then there's nothing in their way. That way, they've got complete victory. So it's sort of a temptation to them to let him go in and take the chances that he can't do anything in order to completely demoralize the majority of the electorate.
So, Paul, wrapping it up now, whether Trump gets in or not for a second term, how do you envision this country 4 years from now, whether Trump is in office or not?
Well, I don't think he'll be in office, but even if he is, I don't think he'll be permitted to do anything. If somehow he is succeeding, they'll simply assassinate him while he's in office. They're so close to total power. Look, we now have a Supreme Court justice who doesn't believe in the First Amendment. She says, and this is a Democrat appointee, it hamstrings the government. Well, that's what it's supposed to do. And so it's lawless. We'll live in a lawless environment. Law will be a weapon to close down all opposition. There'll be no alternative media. It'll cease to exist. Elon Musk will have endless problems. They'll get him too, because he allowed Twitter to tell the truth, or X as he calls it. It'll be a total tyranny. In 4 years, the United States will be a total tyranny. They'll still have elections. They won't mean anything any more than the elections during the Stalin era meant anything. You know, Stalin would announce we won by 99.9% of the vote. And so it just means the entirety of the Western world is in end times, where it's living in end times. I don't think there'll be anything left of freedom, of government integrity, of law in 4 years. Nothing will be left. An indictment, an accusation will be proof of guilt. Just all you have to do is make an accusation, they're guilty. And and people will be scared to death. Everybody will be isolated, and they can't unite, they can't do anything. We're already so divided because of diversity. And the country will simply continue to be overrun, and it'll essentially be a form of genocide of America. It'll be an intentional, inflicted genocide of the United States. And the same thing is going on everywhere in Europe and in Canada and Australia, New Zealand. The entire Western world right now is experiencing a form of genocide. That's what diversity, equity, and inclusion are. This is genocide of the ethnic Western countries. So, you know, if Trump gets in, at least we can have some sort of minimum hope that he'll be able to do something. It may be a false hope, but at least hope, some hope is better than none.
Well, Paul, once again, thank you for the dire analysis of what we're facing over the next 4 years. And you've been so accurate in your analysis over the years. This time, I'm hoping that you are not accurate, but
me too. Me too. I would challenge that it's dire. I think it's realistic. It's a realistic explanation. I mean, how else can you explain what's going on and the enormous risk they take? I mean, the Democrats aren't afraid of people seeing what they're doing. They're not afraid. You would have thought this would have brought down the government a long time ago.
right.
They're simply not afraid. So that tells you they're very confident that they're going to seize total control. And we know the Democrats, it's an anti-white party. There's no doubt about it. It's completely anti-white, anti-American. It's against our culture. It's against normality. They're busy, whatever they're doing, legalizing abnormality, legalizing sexual perversion. I mean, it's amazing. And nothing happens. They use the public schools to indoctrinate the kids. Everybody knows this, and it continues. So clearly they're confident. You don't reveal this sort of thing if you're not confident.
Good point. Yeah. Well, Paul, thanks once again, and we'll stay in touch as long as we can. Paul,
As long as we can. Okay, Larry.
thank you, Paul.
Goodbye for now.